At Christmas, I was working a double shift in the ER. My in-laws and sister-in-law told my 17-year-old daughter there was no room for her at the table. She had to drive home alone and spend Christmas in an empty house. I didn't make a scene. I took action instead. The next morning, my in-laws found a letter at their door and started screaming. On Christmas Eve, I got home around 11:45 at night, dead on my feet. I just finished a 16-hour surgery on a car crash victim, 3 lives saved, but my hands were still shaking from the adrenaline. That kind of shift. So when I saw Emily's boots by the door, my first thought was someone's bleeding. Then I saw her coat crumpled on the armrest, her overnight bag still zip tight, and her curled up on the couch in that defensive sleep position like she was protecting herself from the world. I stood there waiting for my exhausted brain to catch up. She was supposed to be at my in-laws overnight, 13 years of tradition. She'd begged to drive herself just once, newly licensed and desperate to prove her independence. She even left 2 hours early to help with preparations. My husband and I were both pulling emergency shifts, so the plan made perfect sense until it shattered. "Emily," I said softly. She opened her eyes instantly, like she'd been waiting for me. "Sweetheart, why are you here?" She sat up slowly, her face already telling me everything I didn't want to know. "They said there wasn't room." My chest tightened. "Room where?" "At the table." Her voice cracked like thin ice. She tried to cover it with a shrug. It fooled no one. "Grandma Beatrice said they weren't expecting me, that there were already too many people." She looked right at me and said, "You don't belong here. You're not welcome." She made it sound so matter-of-fact, like I was some stranger who'd wandered into the wrong house. "But you confirmed yesterday," I said carefully. "Yeah, I even texted this morning." She opened the door and just stared at me, like I'd shown up at the wrong house. Emily's hands twisted in her lap. Then she said there wasn't a bed either, the backup excuse. She said they didn't want me driving back late but also didn't know where to put me. So I left. "Did anyone offer to drive you home?" Uncle Mike was right there. He just looked away. I stared at her, my surgeon's mind cataloging every detail like evidence. "Did they at least let you eat?" Another hollow shrug. The table was packed. Chloe was in my usual spot, you know, the one by the window that I've sat in since I was 5. Grandpa Franklin was showing her his old teaching awards, acting like she was the future Nobel Prize winner. No one even glanced at me. Then Grandma Beatrice said, "It's just family tonight," and Aunt Serena nodded like that explained everything. So I left. She gestured toward our kitchen table. I made toast. I turned and saw it, a single slice on a paper towel, cold and pathetic, half a banana beside it. That was her Christmas dinner while 13 people feasted on the turkey I'd paid for and the house I'd bought them. I felt something crystallize in my chest, not anger, not yet, just that surgical precision that kicks in right before I make the cut that saves a life. Or ends one. "I wasn't hungry anyway," she whispered, "not really." That's when her composure finally cracked. She fought it, God, she tried so hard. Looked up at the ceiling, blinked rapidly, bit her lip like she could physically hold back the pain. "They made it seem like I'd imposed," she whispered, like showing up to my own family's Christmas was presumptuous. And then she broke, quiet tears that fell like accusations, each one a testimony to 13 years of subtle cruelty I'd been too busy saving other people's children to notice. "I was going to bring my homemade cookies," she added, "but I thought they'd have enough dessert already." I sat beside her and pulled her close. She collapsed against me like she'd been holding herself together with pure willpower, waiting for someone safe enough to fall apart with. After her breathing steadied, she wiped her nose on her sleeve. "I know they've never really accepted you," she said quietly, "but I thought," she stopped herself. "You thought being their granddaughter would be enough." She nodded. "They didn't even sound mean about it," she added, voice hollow. "Just practical. Like I was a problem to solve, not a person they were supposed to love." I didn't go to bed right away. I sat in the kitchen staring at her overnight bag, still perfectly zipped. She'd packed it so methodically, chosen the cream cashmere sweater that Grandma Beatrice had once complimented, brought a little tin of homemade chocolate chip cookies she'd spent hours perfecting. Even wrapped small gifts for her younger cousins with handwritten cards. I opened the fridge, there was nothing special in there. We hadn't planned a backup Christmas because we'd never needed one. Why would we? After 13 years of marriage, I trusted my husband's family completely. That's the part that kept circling in my mind, not the pathetic toast dinner or the empty house, not even that she'd driven home alone on icy December roads. It's that they looked her directly in the eyes, this brilliant, kind, courageous girl who'd arrived punctually with homemade gifts and genuine excitement, and with 28 people crammed inside that house I'd bought them, told her, "There's no room for you." They didn't mean no physical space, they meant not you, not ever, not really. The next morning, my husband dragged himself through the door after his own brutal shift. Emily was still sleeping off her heartbreak. I told him everything, every cruel word, every deliberate exclusion, every moment our daughter had been made to feel unwanted. He stood motionless for a long moment, processing the betrayal, then said quietly, "So what do we do now?" I didn't answer immediately, but the decision had already crystallized in my mind with surgical precision. Because there's turning the other cheek when someone slights you personally, and then there's allowing them to emotionally devastate your child. And my in-laws had chosen the latter. I didn't make a scene or call screaming. I took calculated action instead. The next morning, my in-laws found a legal document at their door and started screaming loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. I don't remember the exact moment I first got labeled the weird one in my husband's family, probably before I'd even finished introducing myself. When I was dating David in college, I'd mentioned wanting to specialize in trauma surgery. His mother Beatrice had wrinkled her nose and said, "How morbid, dear. Don't you want to do something more feminine?" His sister Serena had laughed and said I probably enjoyed cutting people open. His father Franklin had just grunted and changed the subject to football. I loved complex medical cases, devoured surgical journals, asked detailed questions about innovative procedures at dinner parties. At family gatherings, I was the one who actually contributed to conversations about current events. In David's family, that was enough to get you labeled the show-off who thinks she's better than everyone. Nobody else in his family had pursued higher education, most had barely graduated high school. I was the only one who'd earned multiple degrees, spoke 3 languages, and had traveled internationally for medical conferences. Franklin used to joke, but not really joke, that David must have been thinking with something other than his brain when he chose me. Too complicated for our simple family, he'd say, then he'd chuckle like it was harmless. Once I overheard him telling Beatrice that I was the type who'd probably leave David once I got bored with playing house. He said I seemed like the kind of woman who thought she was too good for domestic life. I never confronted him about it, still haven't. By the time we were engaged, Serena had perfected her role as the family's darling. She was bubbly, agreeable, content with her part-time retail job and complete financial dependence on her husband. She knew how to play helpless and made sure everyone understood she was the normal daughter-in-law they had always wanted. She used to introduce me to people as David's wife, the one who thinks she's smarter than everyone. When I actually started earning serious money, she upgraded it to our family's personal ATM. Such progress. When I graduated medical school summa cum laude, the family's response was notably muted. No celebration dinner, no congratulations. Beatrice asked if I planned to actually work or if this was just some expensive hobby. I told her I'd be starting my surgical residency immediately. She said she hoped I wouldn't let my career interfere with giving David the family life he deserves. I worked 100-hour weeks through residency, took the most challenging rotations, came home exhausted but determined to excel. Meanwhile, my in-laws assumed I was living some glamorous doctor fantasy. They never visited the cramped apartment where David and I survived on ramen and determination. Years later, after completing my fellowship and establishing my practice, I finally achieved the financial stability I'd worked toward since childhood. David and I bought our first real home, a modest but comfortable place where we could actually have guests and cook proper meals. And that's when the requests started flowing like a steady IV drip. Can you help with Serena's car payment? Can you co-sign for Franklin's medical equipment loan? Can you refer us to a specialist for Beatrice's arthritis? I accommodated what I could, usually without hesitation. When the in-laws approached retirement, prematurely and with virtually no savings, I intervened decisively. They'd never owned property, always struggled with rent. Poor credit, poor planning, whatever the crisis du jour happened to be. So I purchased a comfortable 3-bedroom house in their preferred neighborhood and handed them the deed. I told them it was a family investment, that I'd handle the mortgage payments indefinitely. The property remained in my name for legal purposes, but they lived there as if they owned it. Rent-free, utilities covered, maintenance handled. Medical expenses too. My insurance network provided access they'd never afford otherwise. For 13 years, I never once said no. Until 3 months ago. That's when Serena called with her latest demand. Chloe, her daughter, the supposed family genius, had been accepted into an exclusive STEM enrichment program at a prestigious private academy. She's inherited your analytical mind, Serena said, as if my intelligence was genetic property she could claim. This opportunity could determine her entire future trajectory. I asked for the specifics and cost breakdown. $85,000 for the full program, she said, but it's a worthwhile investment, and you of all people understand the value of education. That's where I stopped listening. Emily had never attended anything remotely that expensive. Not because she couldn't qualify, she'd simply never asked for such extravagance. She's practical, considerate, thoughtful. She would never dream of demanding that kind of money from anyone, even though academically she could have easily earned it. I told Serena no, politely but unequivocally. I explained that I was already financing significant family expenses, mortgage, utilities, medical bills, emergency funds. Perhaps they could explore scholarship opportunities or payment plan options. Her tone shifted instantly to pure venom. Wow, must be incredibly comfortable to have everything handed to you and still be so selfish. She's your niece. You're obviously just threatened because Chloe's actually going somewhere important with her life. That accusation was almost amusing, or would have been if I hadn't overheard Beatrice making similar comments a week later when she thought I was out of earshot. Apparently, I was holding back the family's potential, just like I'd always overshadowed poor Serena by being the one with all the advantages. You know, advantages like working 18-hour days and sacrificing my 20s to student loans. I didn't argue, didn't justify my position, didn't explain my reasoning. I simply said no, and I absolutely meant it. That conversation happened exactly 3 weeks before Christmas. Emily was thrilled about Christmas dinner, said she felt mature being trusted to drive there herself. She packed an overnight bag with surgical precision and even wrapped little presents for the younger cousins. I told her I'd see her in the morning and reminded her to text when she arrived. She did, everything seemed perfect. Hours later, I stepped through our front door and discovered Perfect had apparently been cancelled. Emily looked up from the couch with a trembling smile that screamed, "Please pretend this isn't devastating." She told me in the smallest voice that Grandma Beatrice had whispered no space at the table or anywhere else, even though she'd counted 28 chairs in use. A math problem with only one variable, her. I listened. I let her explanation crash around the room like shattered glass. Then I pulled her close and let the silence carry our shared pain. She fell asleep still wearing the cashmere sweater she'd chosen to impress them. When the house finally settled, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the spot where her Christmas feast should have been. I calculated every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every just this once, Victoria that had become permanent. They hadn't run out of room, they'd run out of decency. And they'd used my daughter to deliver the message. That was the moment my surgical training kicked in. No more emotions, no more family diplomacy. I didn't even consider whether I'd act, only how precisely. We didn't speak much on the drive over. My husband sat beside me in silence, his hand steady on my knee like an anchor. Not comforting exactly, just unwavering, present. That was enough. The morning after Christmas always has that strange, muffled quality, like the world still processing yesterday's excess. I was hoping the house would be empty. It wasn't, there were still 2 extra cars in the driveway. I recognized one as Serena's, the other probably belonged to whatever relative had lingered for leftover turkey. We got out. I clutched the envelope tight. I hadn't slept, the surgery, the scene with Emily, the pathetic toast still sitting on our counter. It was all circulating in my mind like a diagnosis I couldn't shake. I rang the bell, waited. No response. I rang again, knocked firmly. Nothing. Let's just leave it, my husband suggested gently. I stood there another moment, then nodded. We walked back toward the car. I wedged the envelope securely against the door frame where the wind couldn't claim it. I was opening the driver's side door when I heard it, the squeak of hinges, shuffling slippers. I turned. Beatrice stepped out, wrapped in one of those garish holiday robes she always bragged about buying on clearance. She bent down, retrieved the envelope, tore it open, and began reading. Her expression shifted from confusion to horror to pure rage. "Franklin." Her voice shattered like breaking crystal. "Franklin, get out here. She's evicting us." My father-in-law appeared at the door in rumpled yesterday's clothes. "What the hell?" Serena followed, still in her Christmas pajamas, clutching a coffee mug like she expected this to be pleasant morning chit-chat. "What's happening?" Beatrice turned and jabbed her finger down the driveway like I was some vagrant who'd soiled her property. "You ungrateful little..." We got in the car and drove away before I could hear her complete the insult. Didn't matter, I knew her greatest hits by heart. By the time we reached home, my phone was already buzzing. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. The sixth time, I answered. "How dare you?" Beatrice shrieked. No greeting, no pause, certainly no concern for Emily. "You've completely lost your mind." I held the phone away from my ear. I could still hear Franklin bellowing in the background. "If you go through with this, you're no daughter-in-law of ours," he roared. They didn't ask why. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't even mention Emily. Not once. I hung up. They kept calling. Serena started texting frantically. I think one message actually read, "This will destroy your professional reputation. Think of your medical career." Oh, sweetheart, my patients don't care where my in-laws live. By evening, my phone looked like it had survived a digital assault, 32 missed calls, 14 texts, 3 voicemails. One cousin even had the audacity to message, "Not my business, but this seems extreme. You only get one family." I didn't respond to any of them. The next morning, there was aggressive knocking at my door. I checked the peephole. Naturally, Beatrice. She was standing on my porch in that same ridiculous robe, clutching the eviction notice, now wrinkled and damp like she'd been strangling it for hours. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She didn't wait for permission. "You're actually doing this?" she hissed. "After everything we've done for you?" I let that hang in the air for a moment, then said calmly, "You mean the house I purchased for you? The bills I've paid? The health insurance I arranged because your Medicare didn't cover your medications?" She flinched briefly, then straightened, eyes blazing. "We welcomed you into this family. We gave you everything. You didn't even let my daughter eat dinner," I said. That stopped her momentarily, but she rallied quickly. "Don't be dramatic, we simply didn't have enough seating." "There were 28 people there," I said, including a neighbor. Her mouth formed a tight line. "I didn't send that notice to be vindictive," I continued, "but if you think you can treat Emily like she's expendable." "Oh, for God's sake." She exploded, suddenly animated again. "Stop acting like we're villains. You're the one destroying your family over a simple misunderstanding. And now you're threatening your own in-laws." She waved the letter like courtroom evidence. Then, and I swear this felt completely theatrical, she ripped it in half. Just stood there and tore it down the middle, like that would somehow nullify the legal proceedings. "There," she declared. "That's finished. Now, if you want us to forgive you, you'll pay for Chloe's academy program and abandon this ridiculous tantrum." She smiled like she'd just solved a complex equation. I didn't respond because that was the moment I understood they hadn't taken me seriously. Not for a second. Not when I was dating David, not when I became a surgeon, not even now. To them, I was still the awkward, ambitious girl who should be grateful for inclusion and know her place. The outsider they tolerated but never truly respected. They assumed I wouldn't follow through. But they were catastrophically wrong. So I let Beatrice storm off my porch, muttering to herself like some tragic character, and I closed the door. Quietly, deliberately. But in my mind, I was already implementing the next phase. Beatrice tore up the eviction notice like it was junk mail, right in front of me, right after calling me selfish, heartless, and mentally unstable. Then she had the audacity to smile and say, "Pay for Chloe's academy program and we'll forgive you." She said, "We'll forgive you." Like they were the injured parties. Like excluding my daughter at Christmas was some minor social oversight instead of calculated cruelty. 2 mornings later, I met with my attorney. I laid everything out: the house in my name, the mortgage I'd been paying for 13 years, the utilities, the insurance premiums, the countless silent sacrifices. He didn't flinch. "I assume you want formal eviction proceedings," he said, like discussing the weather. I nodded. The papers went out that same week, 60 days, legally stamped, officially served. And this time, they couldn't tear it up and pretend it didn't exist. I kept paying the mortgage, wasn't about to destroy my credit for the sake of making a point. But everything else? Terminated. Utilities, cable, medical coverage, they got an intensive education in what no support actually means. 2 weeks later, someone knocked on my door. It was Aunt Margaret, the reasonable one, or so I believed. She carried a casserole and wore a practiced expression of concern. "Victoria," she said, "I just want to understand." I let her in. I already knew her mission. We sat in the living room. I offered coffee, neither of us drank it. "This just doesn't seem like you," she began, evicting family over a misunderstanding. I laughed once, without humor. I told her about the house, the bills, the Christmas betrayal, how my in-laws had accommodated 28 people, including neighbors and distant relatives I'd never met, but not their own granddaughter. Aunt Margaret went pale. "I wasn't aware," she whispered. "They didn't mention it," I corrected. She left looking like someone who'd witnessed something terrible. 3 days later, I received a text: "I understand now. I'm sorry." 1 week before the deadline, my attorney called. "They haven't relocated at all," he reported. "Then we proceed," I replied. I listed the property that same day. Set a reasonable price, not inflated. I wasn't trying to maximize profit. I just wanted closure. A buyer made an offer immediately. Young families love that neighborhood. They just wanted vacant possession. Clean slate required, my realtor emphasized. "Understood," I said. I didn't attend the removal day. The new owners handled it through proper legal channels. I heard it wasn't pleasant, but what followed wasn't any better. Serena took them in, naturally. My sister-in-law always enjoyed performing the role of dutiful daughter. She gave dramatic interviews to relatives like it was a media campaign. "She's abandoning elderly family," she declared, all because of one holiday miscommunication. 3 weeks later, she appeared on my doorstep, eyes red-rimmed, hair disheveled. "I can't handle this," she said without preamble. "They're arguing constantly. Beatrice complains the guest room's too cramped. Franklin says my children are disruptive. They refuse to share the bathroom. I'm losing my mind." I leaned against the door frame, arms folded. "They need their own place," she said desperately. "You could at least help with a security deposit." "No, Serena. You watched Emily get rejected on Christmas and said nothing. That was your choice. This is mine." She stared, then turned and walked away. A week later, she evicted them too. They ended up in a rental nobody would recommend: 2 cramped rooms, inadequate heating, a front porch that sagged like defeat. Their pension barely covered rent and groceries. Gone were the vacation plans, the holiday parties, the anniversary cruise they'd been planning. They attempted to rally sympathy from extended family, claiming I'd abandoned them without warning, that I was unstable, that I'd always been cold. But by then, I'd quietly contacted the uncles and cousins, shared copies of the bills I'd paid, forwarded the eviction notice, time-stamped and legally certified. One cousin simply responded with "wow." Another sent a thumbs-up emoji. The family wasn't rushing to rescue them. And neither was I. 2 months later, Emily and I were sitting on our front porch, sipping iced tea and watching the sunset paint our neighborhood in golden hues. No agenda, no performance, just a peaceful mother-daughter afternoon that felt like luxury after years of walking on eggshells around my in-laws. "I don't miss them, you know," Emily said quietly, her voice carrying a maturity that both broke my heart and made me proud. "Not even a little bit." I didn't either. The relief was so profound it sometimes surprised me, like finally removing shoes that had been too tight for 13 years. My phone buzzed against the wicker table, unknown number. I opened it reflexively. "Hope you're proud of what you've done to this family. You've destroyed everything." I deleted it without hesitation. No pause, no second thought, no flicker of guilt. "They'll probably keep texting," Emily observed casually, taking another sip of her tea. "Aunt Serena's persistent when she wants something." "They always do," I replied, "but they're not my responsibility anymore." They never really were. And they weren't. They had declared there was no room for Emily at their table, treating her like an unwelcome stranger in the house I'd provided for them. Now there's no room left in our lives for their cruelty, their manipulation, or their entitled demands. Fast forward 2 years, they're still trapped in that deteriorating rental property, still pointing fingers at everyone except themselves. Franklin's health has declined without the premium medical coverage I used to provide. Beatrice has aged dramatically under the stress of actual financial responsibility. Serena's marriage is strained from the burden of supporting 2 additional adults on a single income. Meanwhile, Emily is absolutely thriving. She's studying biomedical engineering at her dream university, and the money from the house sale covered far more than just tuition. It bought her peace of mind, confidence, and the security of knowing her mother will always choose her well-being over toxic family dynamics. She volunteers at the local children's hospital now, inspired by watching me save lives, and she's never once asked why we don't visit her grandparents anymore. I don't answer their calls when they come through with new numbers. I don't send emergency money when their utilities get cut off. I don't lose sleep over their constant attempts to guilt me back into funding their lifestyle. I protected my daughter when it mattered most. I chose her, completely and without reservation, exactly as a mother should. The medical community has been nothing but supportive. Several colleagues have shared similar stories of setting boundaries with toxic family members. My surgical practice has never been stronger, and Emily often jokes that she's proud to be the daughter of someone who operates with precision both in the OR and in life. But tell me, did I go too far, or just far enough? Was I a protective mother or a vindictive daughter-in-law? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more stories like this about standing up to toxic family dynamics, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications.